Hello the internet, my name's Laura and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing another episode of Grow a Green Thumb. This is a series where I go over basic plant care tasks just for people who don't know better yet, right? Like you can't know something until you learn it. This is in particular different ways to water, which might be something that you didn't really think about before, and that's kind of part of the reason. I want to give you options so that you know what's out there, and then you can figure out what's best for your plants. So if you are interested in that, go ahead and stick around. Okay, so different ways to water. You know, you've been probably getting along fine if you're new to taking care of plants by just putting some water in our handy dandy little and pouring it in. And that's great. And that works, right? If you haven't watched the video on different types of water, you might want to give that a gander just so that you're aware of the different types of water. In most cases, tap water is fine. So like that's not like a huge concern, but just be aware. You know, check out that video so that you know what the different types of water are. But anyway, there are different ways to water. I've tried a lot of them. But we're going to go over all of them today so that you can kind of see what they are. So the first thing that I am going to go over in this video, even though it is called different ways to water, I'm going to go over how to test your soil to figure out whether or not your plant needs water, because that is also a skill. That's also a skill, and I'm not sure it deserves its own video, so we're just going to go ahead and put it in this one. The first way that you can tell if a plant needs water is by looking at the plant itself. This beautiful begonia pink minx, I have not been keeping up on the watering very well, and this particular plant, cane begonias like this, because this is a cane begonia, their leaves will crisp really bad on the edges. And I know, because I've been taking care of this plant for a while, I know part of the problem is that I haven't been watering it enough, but you can also, look for these little clues like this. The other way that you can tell, especially on more succulent type plants like this Haworthia, is that the leaves are no longer plump. They're kind of squishy. They don't look like they're filled with water, because the point of succulents is they're supposed to be, plump and filled with water, and these ones very clearly aren't. So that's another way that you can tell. There's physical signs that your plants will give you that say, hey, I don't have enough water, right? These ones are kind of unfortunate because this doesn't heal. When they're acting kind of droopy and soft like this will heal. Like the water will fill back up the leaves and it won't leave any lasting effect. So sometimes plants will actually literally just get limp. So like this guy, normally he is sitting with his stems like straight up and the leaves are all like up like this, right? There's not enough water in the stems. It's very similar to where the leaves are not plump with water. This is more, the stems are not plump with water, and thus the plant is kind of falling over a little bit. And then when I water this, the stems will fill back up with water and the whole plant will kind of come back up like this. So those are things that you can see in the plant that will help you tell whether or not they need water. There are some types of plants where the leaves will curl. I unfortunately don't have an example of that, but the leaves will literally just kind of curl in on themselves like this in order to help preserve water. So those are some different ways. That's if you're looking at the plants. You can also, very obviously, put your fingers on top of the soil and be like, that soil is dry, or that soil is wet, or that soil is damp, or, whatever the soil happens to be. So I can tell when I actually put my fingers in here that these soils are very dry on all of these plants. This one, obviously, this is a succulent, so I let this one dry out pretty well. But this one definitely needs water. This one definitely needs water. So testing with your finger. Sometimes, because certain plants need a certain amounts of water. You can also stick your finger down in there and be like, oh, is the soil wet down in there? Because like the top will be dry, but like down in the soil, it will still be somewhat wet. Some people like to do that. I generally don't ever do that. I will touch the top of the soil. I don't like to stick my finger in there and get the finger there all dirty. So, the other thing that I have is I have this handy dandy little water meter. And for the most part, I find this to be fairly accurate. And it means that I don't have to stick my finger down in there. So I stick it down in the soil, like yo. And as you can see, I'm pretty sure I can see it in the thing. It's down here on like the 1. There's like no, let me check and make sure that I'm not actually, yeah. It's down there on the 1. That means there's no water in there at all, right? Now, different plants are going to want different levels of moisture. So for this plant, it going down to a 1 is good. I like it to dry out between waterings. Maybe not quite this much that it's like flopping over, but this is okay for this plant. This plant here, if I stick that in there, you'll see that it's actually on the moist side, but I said that this plant needs water, and that's because this particular plant, begonias in general, like to stay more moist. So part of that is kind of knowing where your plant wants to be. It's not always let it dry out completely. Sometimes it is. And the other thing that I like about this is, like, some people don't trust these because they say that the thing is off. But if you stick it down in there, and it's still wet, then the dirt that comes up on here will still be wet because it was down in there. And if it goes into something dry and it comes back out, then it's clean. It's almost like sticking a toothpick into a cake to see whether or not it's done. If it comes out with like wet soil on it, then it's obviously still wet to a certain extent. If it comes out dry, then it's cooked. No, it's out of water. And then one of the other ways, and this is this doesn't work for all plants, but especially in smaller pots. Bigger pots are harder to tell because like they're just kind of heavy. But smaller pots, if you lift them enough, you'll actually be able to tell whether or not they're still wet or not. It's kind of like when you pick up a lettuce at the supermarket, right? And they tell you to get a lettuce that feels heavier than it looks. And then you pick up the lettuce and it's very dense, right? So when the plant has water in it, or when the soil has water in it, it feels heavy because there's the water in there. And then when you get one, I mean, I don't know why I'm reaching for another one. You guys can't tell. This one feels like it's got water in it, right? Very often these primulinas, I can tell whether or not they need to be watered just by lifting them. If it feels light, it probably doesn't have very much water in it. If it feels heavy, then it probably has a lot of water in it. So that's another way that you can tell. Again, that's just you picking up your plants and being able to tell. You'll probably pick up the smaller ones, and those ones are just easier to tell. There's just, you know, generally for my really big plants, I always use the water meter. Smaller plants, you know, I use other things. And then I'm just going to throw in here, I actually also have a spreadsheet that I try and keep updated. I don't always keep it up. Where I have it recorded when the last time I watered my plant is, and then I kind of figure out the plant needs to be watered every 14 days or every 7 days or every, you know, however many days. And I can also use that. I'm just going to throw that in there. I have a video on that somewhere as well. But, you know, some people with more like data minds might enjoy that a little bit more than the touch and tell type of situation. Okay, so now that we've talked about whether or not your plants need water, we're going to go into the actual watering process, which was the point of this video. Different ways to water. Number one, you want to have some sort of container to transport water from the water source to your plant. This can be, you can also bring your plants to your sink, obviously, and just pour it right out of your sink. You can have a lovely watering can, a lovely smaller watering can, but anything that like transports water can be used. I know that Harley G likes to fill up a cup, like a drinking cup, and that's how she waters her plants. She finds it meditative. It would drive me insane, but you know, everybody's got their own system, right? So the container obviously doesn't really matter. Okay, so this plant needs to be watered. And so you take the water and you pour some in. Ta-da! It's very amazing and exciting. I have just watered this plant, right? I know you guys are like, really? Yes, actually. The amount of water that you put in can be dependent on how much water the plant needs. And you'll also eventually get used to how much water it takes to fill up a particular pot or a particular thing of soil. And I always have some sort of a tray in the bottom. Most of my pots have drainage holes, right? I always have some sort of a tray to collect the water that's going to come out the bottom, because it just gets messy if you don't do that. So, but this one, you can see only a little bit of water came out the bottom. Swish, 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 swish. So I watered basically about as much as that plant needed. All right, this plant, on the other hand, this plant needs a really good soaking. That is crooked. This plant needs a really good soaking. You can tell because this is the one that we saw with the leaves. So actually I'm gonna do this, and I didn't think about. Okay, so what I have is I have this bucket. It's actually a planter, but it doesn't have a hole in the bottom of it. And what I will do is I will take plant, that's really bad for the framing. I will take plants that are very, very thirsty. And what I'll do is I'll put them on top of this. And I'll pour a whole bunch of water in there. See, I'm pouring it, it's like all the water. And then it's gonna start coming out the bottom, right? So I wait for it to come out the bottom. You guys can probably see it coming out the little holes here. Okay, and then once the water flow slows, I'm going to actually pour in more water. And what this is going to do is just like completely soak the soil, right? Because, you know, when you put that much water in and some of the water comes out, it's just the soil hasn't had time to absorb it all yet. And so if you want to make sure that it's had enough time, or the soil has absorbed a whole bunch of water, you want to go ahead and throw some water through a couple of times. And I'll just do that until I'm satisfied. And then this also lets all the excess water drain, because in that one plant, the little water was sitting at the bottom. That means that that water is still going to be there. You can throw that water out, obviously, but especially on succulents, I like to drench them very thoroughly, and then I don't want them sitting in water, because he's got his own little tray to make sure that he does not drip water everywhere. So I let that, you know, until Sometimes I'll actually let it sit there for a little while. Obviously for this video, I'm not gonna let it sit here for a little while because I need this, but all right, so those are pretty basic, like you take the watering can, you pour water into them. One of the other types of watering a plant is called bottom watering. Once again, I'm going to lower this here so you guys can see. So this plant, this is a primulina. They do not like water on their leaves. And so what I do with this one is I have this nice tray, and I pour water into the tray like so. And then, I'm not sure if you can see, this plant isn't super thirsty, but I filled it up and it's already draining the water. And what it's doing is the dry soil that's inside here is sucking up the moisture. And so this, like I was saying with the other one, you know, you water it a bunch of times so that the soil saturates. When the soil itself is pulling in the water from the bottom, it's saturating the soil just as much as it wants to, right? Like it's kind of, it can't suck in more water than it can hold, if that makes sense. Whereas if you're pouring from the top, all that water is going into the soil, whether the soil wants it or not, and then there can be excess soil. But if the soil is sucking it up from the bottom, it only gets as much water as it wants, right? And then I will, with these guys, I'll check, I'll usually let them sit for half an hour. And then if there's still water in here after that time, I will then dump out the extra water because the soil has taken in all of the water that it wants. So this is bottom watering. You can do it basically for any plant, as long as it has a hole in the bottom, obviously. And it's gonna take a different amount of time based on how big the pot is, obviously. I also do this with my orchids. And because that soil is so airy that it doesn't, the water sometimes just goes right through. So this is bottom watering. If you have a problem with overwatering your plants, like this is a thing that you tend to do, bottom watering can be a good way to help with that, because you're still giving the plant water, but you're not forcing the water into the soil. You're saying, how much water do you want to take? And then, yeah. I'm not saying that this will mean that you'll never overwater, because if the soil stays too wet, then the soil is way too wet for all the time. But this can help if you happen to be a habitual overwaterer. So, bottom watering. Okay, so the next method that, the next method is one that I don't think I've ever actually used. Some people will take, especially succulent, and they will dunk it all the way into a thing of water. Like water is up here and the whole thing, and then they'll let that soak in. And what I feel like that is a more extreme version of bottom watering, because then the water is like everywhere and it sucks up a certain amount of moisture, and then I assume that you leave it in there for about a half an hour, and then you pull it out, and then the water is all soaked. That's just not one that I ever have felt like I've needed. I have also done a method that's kind of a combination where I will pour water on the top, and then I will also bottom water it from the bottom. And those are for larger planters, so like maybe this guy here. I would pour some water on the top. This does actually need to be watered, so I'll go ahead and water it. But I'll pour water in on the top, and knowing that this pot is so tall, I'll then also pour some water into the bottom. And I know I'm not letting you guys see that, but that's what I'm doing. And then that way, it gets water in from the top, it gets water in from the bottom, it just waters the whole thing much more quickly. And then again, I will, after a certain amount of time, throw out this, I will throw out all this extra water, because I don't want it sitting in water. I'm also going to mention Leka. I'm not sure I'm ever going to do a video on Leka. Leka is, I mentioned Leka in the soil video. Leka is basically, they're little clay balls. There's no dirt. You just put it's like a hydroponics thing. You put the roots of the plant into the Leka, and then it has water in it, and then you cycle the water. And I'm letting you know that it is technically a watering method. But it works for specific types of plants better than others, and it's just not something that I ever really got into. But I want to throw it out there in case. It works really well on aroids and Hoyas, orchids, things that are naturally more apathetic. They grow in trees. Anyway, just letting you guys know about that. There are also other things to watch for while you are watering. When you're pouring the water in on the top, one of the things that you'll want to watch for is how quickly the soil soaks the water in, right? So if you think of like a sponge, if you have like a dry sponge and you've ever like poured water on top or like run it under a faucet and it like the water kind of absorbs into the sponge, like that's about the speed that you want. If the water like is just sitting on the top, generally that means that your dirt is either too compacted or it doesn't have enough aeration media in it, right? Because if the water isn't soaking in, obviously there's no room in the soil for the water. If there's no room in the soil for the water, then the roots are probably having kind of a hard time breaking that up as well. That's the reason for adding perlite. Perlite will help to loosen up soil so that it doesn't get quite so compact. The other thing is, and this happens especially if you let things dry out like with succulents, you'll pour the water in there and it will basically like go right through. Like you pour it and it just comes out the bottom. And then the soil is still dry on the other side of that. Or it only gets like a little bit of water. And that is your soil doesn't have enough water absorbing components, or it's way too old. Old soil will, in a lot of cases, not absorb water really well, or I mean, if you want it to be that well draining, then, like for plants that don't like to sit in a lot of water, okay, but your soil has to hold water at all in order for the plants to get it, or else the plants are not getting any water. I had a plant that I got from Lowe's one time where it was a succulent, so I didn't expect the soil to be like super well, but I put the water in there and it would just come out the bottom. And the succulent started going soft, the way succulents do when it doesn't have enough water in the leaves. And I was like, okay. And I water it and then it didn't get any better. And so eventually I took the soil out, like, because it was in just a little, and I stuck it in a thing of water without the pot. And the soil didn't suck up any water. And so obviously the plant wasn't getting any water because the soil wasn't bringing any water to the roots, and I ended up having to get rid of all that soil and put it into a new mixture, and then it was able to get that. So you want to watch the quality of your soil. They sit in the pots. If it's been like a really long time that that soil has been in that pot, then it's going to get more and more compressed. Like every time you water, it just naturally gets more compressed. Out in the wild, you've got bugs going through the soil. You've got worms and all that kind of good stuff that kind of keep the soil moving and shaking. In your indoor pots, you don't have that, so it kind of will take you watching the soil. Like, don't just water and assume that the plant has gotten water. Like, check and see, is the soil absorbing the water? Is all of the water coming out the bottom, or is just a normal amount of water coming out the bottom? And I know I say things like this a lot, where I'm kind of like, you have to learn what's normal, like the lifting the pot and being like, this has got water in it, or this. It's just a matter of having done it enough times that you know what is normal and what's not. Like, at this point, I can tell you if the soil is not absorbing the water right, but I can't say it absorbs the water at a rate of like 1 centimeter per 5 seconds. Like, I don't know. I just know it is absorbing the water at the correct rate. But that's the thing with plants. That's why I'm making these videos, is just to make you aware of what you should be looking for, right? Because good decisions come from experience. Unfortunately, experience comes from bad decisions. You're going to kill plants. You're going to just have problems, right? You're gonna lose leaves. But in all that, as long as you're paying attention to what you did wrong and then doing it better the next time, then you're gaining that experience, and then you start making more good decisions. At the beginning, you're gonna make a lot of bad decisions because you just don't know better, right? These videos are made to try and help curb that a little bit, because I'm like, these are the things you should be watching for. These are the things that you can do in order to help improve. But you're gonna have to go out there and make the mistakes. You just are. It sucks, but it is the way it is. And that's just part of the cycle. And as long as you accept that it's part of the cycle of learning how to do a skill, because this is any skill, but we're talking about plants here. As long as you accept that that's part of the cycle of learning your skill, then, doesn't mean you take the plant's death any less hard, but at least you know that you're going to do it better the next time. Okay, so that is going to be this video for today. I hope that you've learned a lot about the different ways that you can water, and that this will help you with taking care of your plants in the future. Like I said before, there are videos on different types of water. There's a video on how to mix a soil that is good for your plant. There was something else I mentioned. I don't remember what number 3 is, but when I rewatch this video, I will see what it is. I'm going to put links to the videos that you might be interested in down in the comments. And then if you like this video, go ahead and like this video. If you want to see more of these videos, go ahead and subscribe. I've got, like I said, some of these videos are already created. There will be more in the future, and then I've got the rest of the content on my channel that you might want to check out. I give out tips and tricks all the time because I want you guys to have information so that you can make as many good decisions with your plants as possible. And thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you guys in the next video. I'm going to say video again. All right, bye-bye.